The cottage stood at the end of a winding lane that seemed to forget the rest of the world existed. It was a structure of weathered wood and stone, nestled deep in the countryside where the air smelled of damp earth and wild lavender. To the casual observer, the passing motorist, or the new residents of the village who hadn't yet learned the local history, the cottage was a symbol of decline. The paint on the window frames was peeling in long, sunburnt strips, revealing the gray wood beneath. The roof, covered in moss, had a few missing tiles that let the rain sing a quiet drumming song in the attic during storms. The car in the driveway was a rusted sedan, a relic from the 90s that hadn't run in months, its tires flat, its windows clouded with dust. It looked like a monument to a life that had run out of fuel. But to Martha Galloway, the woman who lived there, the cottage was not a symbol of poverty. It was a fortress. It was a sanctuary. It was a carefully constructed stage set for a play that had been running for 40 years. At 70 years old, Martha had spent the last decade cultivating this image of destitution with the precision of a master artist. She wore cardigans that had been darned so many times the original wool was barely visible, holes patched with mismatched thread that she claimed was all she could afford. She grew her own vegetables in a patchy garden where the soil was turned by her own arthritic hands, producing tomatoes and beans that she canned in jars with handwritten labels. She shopped at the discount store on the edge of town, counting coins at the checkout, apologizing to the cashier for the delay. She told everyone in the village that she was living off a small state pension and the kindness of neighbors. Today, however, the cottage was clean. The dust that usually settled in the corners like gray snow had been wiped away. The floorboards, scratched by decades of footsteps, had been swept until they gleamed. There were balloons tied to the mailbox, bright red and blue, fluttering in the breeze like cheerful sentinels. It was Martha's birthday, and her family was coming. Her daughter, Sarah, lived in the city, 3 hours away by car. She was a high-powered marketing executive, or so she claimed to everyone who asked. She drove a luxury SUV that cost more than the cottage, wore designer suits that hugged her figure with expensive precision, and posted pictures of her life on social media that screamed success, wealth, and influence. Sarah rarely visited. When she did, it was usually to ask for something. Money for a school fee. Help with the kids' summer camp. A place to stay while her house was being renovated. She treated the cottage like a pit stop, a place to refuel her ego by comparing her success to her mother's failure. Today, Sarah was coming with her husband, Tom, and their 2 teenagers, Tyler and Chloe. Martha hadn't seen them in 6 months. She stood by the window, watching the lane. She was wearing her best dress, a simple floral print that she had bought at a thrift store 10 years ago. It was clean and pressed, but the fabric was thin. She had brushed her silver hair until it shone, pulling it back into a neat bun. She looked in the mirror and saw the lines on her face, the map of a life lived quietly. She wondered if Sarah would see them, or if she would just see the wrinkles of age. "They're here," Martha said to herself, her voice barely a whisper in the quiet room. The black SUV turned into the driveway. It looked monstrous next to her tiny cottage, crushing the wildflowers as it parked. The engine ticked as it cooled, a sound of power and money that echoed in the rural silence. Sarah stepped out first, checking her phone. She didn't look at the house. She looked at her watch, tapping the screen with a manicured nail. Tom got out, smoking a cigarette, looking bored, his eyes scanning the property with the disinterest of a man who felt he was slumming it. The teenagers stayed in the car, heads down, glued to their screens, earbuds blocking out the world. Martha opened the door before they could knock. She wanted to greet them on her terms. "Happy birthday to me," she whispered, forcing a smile that felt tight on her face. "Mom," Sarah said, walking up the path. She didn't hug Martha. She held out a gift bag. It was light, flimsy. Probably a scarf. Or a candle. Something that looked thoughtful but cost nothing. "Happy birthday. Sorry we're late. Traffic was a nightmare. The highway was a parking lot." "It's fine," Martha said, taking the bag. She could feel the emptiness of it through the paper. Come in. I've made lunch." They filed into the small living room. They had to duck slightly to get through the door frame. Sarah wrinkled her nose as she entered, her eyes scanning the room for dust. "It smells old in here, Mom. You really need to air this place out." Mold is dangerous for your lungs. I read an article about it. Black mold causes respiratory issues. I open the windows every day, Martha said, her voice steady. She had opened them this morning, letting the fresh country air chase out the stale scent of wood smoke. Please, sit down. They sat on the sofa, which creaked under their weight. The springs groaned in protest. Martha had prepared sandwiches and tea. Simple food. Brown bread, homemade jam, cheese that she had bought from the local dairy. She knew they wouldn't eat much. They were too important for cottage food. They were used to sushi and steak, to restaurants where the water cost $10. So, Sarah said, sipping her tea from a chipped mug. She held it delicately, as if afraid it might break and cut her. 70. That's a big number. Have you thought about what you're going to do? You can't keep living here alone. It's not safe. The village is miles from the hospital. If you had a heart attack, who would find you? I'm fine, Sarah, Martha said. She sat in her armchair, the one with the patched armrest. I've lived here for 40 years. I know the roads. I know the doctors. But you're slowing down, Tom chimed in, lighting another cigarette despite the "no smoking" sign on the wall. He blew smoke towards the open window, but some of it drifted back into the room. We noticed last time. You forgot where you put the keys. You called me by the wrong name. You called me James. My name is Tom. I did not, Martha said firmly. She remembered clearly. She had called him Thomas. That was his full name. I called you Thomas. That is your name. See, Sarah said to Tom, turning her head slightly. She's getting confused. Memory slips. Mom, we're worried. We've been talking. There's a wonderful retirement community in Florida. Warm weather. Medical care on site. Golf courses. People your age. We think you should move there. Martha put her teacup down on the coaster. The china made a sharp clink. Florida. I don't want to go to Florida. I want to stay here. This is my home. Your father built this house. It's not about what you want, Sarah said, her voice sharpening. The mask of concern slipped, revealing the frustration beneath. It's about what's practical. This house, it's worth something, right? Even in this condition, the land is valuable. The countryside is developing. If you sell, you could pay for the Florida place and still have money left over. For us. I mean, for your care. We could manage it for you. There it is, Martha thought. The hook. The bait. They hadn't come for her birthday. They had come for the house. They had come for the secret. I'm not selling, Martha said. This house is all I have. It's all I have left of him. It's a burden, Tyler said, looking up from his phone for the first time. He was 16, tall and lanky, wearing headphones around his neck. It's ugly. Why do you keep it? You could get a nice condo. Something modern. Because your grandfather built it, Martha said. She looked at her grandson. He didn't know his grandfather. John had died before Tyler was born. With his own hands. Every nail. Every beam. Grandpa was a carpenter, Chloe muttered. She was 14, scrolling through Instagram. It shows. The walls are crooked. The insult hung in the air. Martha felt the sting, but she didn't react. She had heard it before. They thought she was weak. They thought she was a lonely old woman who would do whatever they said because she was afraid of being alone. They thought she was desperate for their attention. They didn't know about the box. In the corner of the room, on a high shelf behind a stack of old National Geographic magazines, sat a wooden box. It was old, carved from oak, with a brass lock that had tarnished to a deep brown. They had asked about it every time they visited. What's in the box, Grandma? Is it the inheritance? Can we see? Asterisk. Martha had always smiled and said, just old memories. Photos. Letters. Nothing valuable. But today, the box was different. Today, it was unlocked. The key was sitting on the table next to the teapot. We have a lawyer coming, Sarah said suddenly. She put her mug down. Just to help with the paperwork. For the house. We thought we could get it done today. While we're all here. It's his birthday too, in a way. The house's birthday. A lawyer? Martha asked. She kept her voice calm. You invited a lawyer to my birthday lunch. It's efficient, Tom said. He ashed his cigarette into a saucer. Time is money, Martha. You know that. We don't want you to stress about the details. He's just outside, waiting. Martha stood up. She walked to the shelf and took down the wooden box. It was heavy. It felt like lead in her hands. She carried it to the coffee table and set it down in front of Sarah. The wood thudded against the glass surface. "You want to talk about the house?" Martha said. She looked at her daughter. "You want to talk about money? Let's talk." Sarah's eyes lit up. She reached for the box. Her fingers trembled slightly. "Finally. We were wondering when you'd open this. We thought you were hiding it from us." "Wait," Martha said. She placed her hand on the lid. "Before you open it, I have a story to tell. A story about where the money came from. You think I am poor. You think I struggle. You think this house is my only asset." "Mom, please," Sarah said impatiently. She glanced at her watch again. "Just open the box. We don't have all day." "No," Martha said. "You will listen. Because once you know the truth, you cannot unknow it. And it will change everything. It will change who you are." She looked at her grandchildren. They were finally looking at her, curious. The phones were down. She looked at Tom, who was skeptical, his arms crossed. And she looked at Sarah, who was greedy. Her eyes were fixed on the box like a hawk on a mouse. 40 years ago, Martha began, her voice steady. She looked at the fire in the grate, though it wasn't lit. "Your grandfather and I didn't just build this house. We didn't just hammer nails. We built a company, Galloway Tech. We invented a software protocol. A way to encrypt data. It is used in almost every smartphone in the world today. Every time you send a message, every time you buy something online, you use our code." Sarah laughed. It was a short, brittle sound. "Mom, stop. You're confusing things. Grandpa was a carpenter. He made chairs. He wore sawdust on his clothes. I remember. He made chairs to hide what he really did," Martha said. "He was an engineer, a genius. But he knew that money changes people. We saw what it did to our brothers, our cousins. So we hid the wealth. We put the fortune in a trust. A trust that I control. We lived simply so you would learn to work. So you would learn to value what you have." "That's a lie," Tom said. He stood up. "If you had millions, why live like this? Why drive that junk car? Why wear those clothes? It doesn't make sense." "Because I wanted to see who loved me," Martha said. She looked at Sarah. "Not for my money. For me. I wanted to know if you would care for me even if I had nothing to give. And now I know." She opened the box. Inside, there was no jewelry. There were no stacks of cash. There was a single document, thick and official, and a key made of silver. "This is the deed to the trust," Martha said. She picked up the paper. "And this is the key to the safety deposit box in Zurich. The balance as of this morning is $40 million. The silence in the room was absolute. It was heavier than the stone walls. Sarah's mouth hung open. Tom's cigarette fell from his fingers onto his pants, burning a hole in the fabric, but he didn't notice. The teenagers looked at each other, eyes wide, their screens forgotten. 40 million, Sarah whispered. Her voice was hollow. "You're joking. This is a trick." "It is not a joke," Martha said. "I have the statements. I have the logs. I have the history. Then we can fix the house," Sarah said, her voice trembling with excitement. She reached out to touch the document. "We can buy a new car." "Mom, this is amazing. Why didn't you tell us? We could have helped you manage it. We could have invested it." "Because I was waiting," Martha said. She pulled the document back. "I was waiting for this day. To see if you would ask about my health. To see if you would ask about my happiness. To see if you would bring me a gift that wasn't calculated. But you only asked about the house. You only asked about the money. You brought a lawyer to my birthday. And, do we qualify?" Tom asked, leaning forward. His eyes were dollar signs. "For the money. Is it ours?" Martha looked at him. She looked at Sarah. She saw the hunger in their faces. It wasn't love. It was consumption. "No," Martha said. She picked up the document. She held it with both hands. She looked at Sarah one last time. "Inheritance is not a right. It is a gift. And you have rejected the gift by rejecting me." She tore the document in half. The sound of the paper ripping was louder than a gunshot. It echoed off the wooden walls. "What are you doing?" Sarah screamed. She lunged for the pieces, her hands clawing at the air. You're crazy. That's our money. That's my inheritance. You can't do that. It was never your money, Martha said. She tore it again. Into quarters. It was mine. And I am giving it away. To who? Tyler asked, standing up. He looked scared. You're giving it to strangers. To the people who actually care, Martha said. There is a neighbor, Mrs. Higgins. She brings me soup when I'm sick. She shovels my snow. She asks how I am. She gets the money. The local hospital gets the money. The school gets the money. The veterans shelter gets the money. You can't do that, Sarah yelled. She was crying now, tears of rage streaking her mascara. I'm your daughter. It's my blood. You're throwing it away. I am keeping it safe, Martha said. From people like you. She walked to the door and opened it. The lawyer was standing there, holding a briefcase. He was a young man, serious, wearing a gray suit. He had been hired by Martha, not Sarah. Mr. Davies, Martha said. Please come in. We have work to do. Sarah stood up, her face red with rage. She looked like a stranger. You'll regret this, Mom. When you're old and sick, who will take care of you? Not us. We're done. Don't call us. Don't expect us to visit. I know, Martha said. She didn't flinch. And I'm okay with that. Sarah stormed out, followed by Tom and the kids. They got into the SUV and sped away, kicking up dust that settled on the wildflowers. Martha watched them go. She didn't cry. She felt light. The weight of the secret was gone. The weight of their expectation was gone. She turned back to the room. The box was empty. The secret was out. The burden was gone. Mr. Davies, she said, let's start the paperwork. To understand Martha's decision, one had to understand the history of the Galloway family. It was a history written in silence and sacrifice, in code and concrete. Martha and her husband, John, had met in university in the 1970s. It was a time of change, of protest, of new ideas. John was a brilliant computer scientist, ahead of his time. While others were learning to use mainframes, John was dreaming of personal computing. Martha was a business major with a sharp mind for finance. She saw the potential in his ideas when no one else did. Together, they had created an algorithm that revolutionized data encryption. In the early days of the Internet, their technology became the backbone of secure transactions. Banks used it. Governments used it. Corporations used it. When the offers came from big tech companies, offering millions, then billions, John and Martha made a pact. They would take the money, but they would hide it. They had seen what money did to families. They had seen cousins fight over inheritances. They had seen friends turn into enemies over loans. They had seen parents become targets for their own children. They wanted Sarah to grow up normal. They wanted her to learn the value of $1. They wanted her to know the satisfaction of earning her own keep. So, they lived in the cottage. John continued to work as a carpenter, taking small jobs. He built decks. He fixed roofs. He wore sawdust on his clothes so people would believe the lie. Martha worked as a librarian. She stamped books. She shelved returns. They drove old cars. They saved their paychecks. And the millions, they went into the trust, managed by a firm in Switzerland that answered only to them. The money grew silently, compounding year after year, while they lived on a fraction of the interest. When Sarah was born, they loved her fiercely. They gave her everything she needed, but nothing she didn't. When she wanted a designer dress for prom, they said no. Make it yourself, Martha had said. And Sarah had, poorly, but she had. When she wanted a car for her 16th birthday, they bought her a bicycle. Pedal power is good for the soul, John had said. We are teaching you resilience, John had told her when she cried. I hate you, Sarah had screamed. She was 15 then. Everyone else has everything. You're just cheap. You're embarrassing. It broke Martha's heart, but they held firm. They believed that when she was older, she would understand. They believed that when they revealed the truth, she would appreciate it more. They thought the reveal would be a moment of joy, of bonding. They didn't anticipate the greed. But John died 10 years ago. A heart attack, sudden and silent. He was in the workshop, sanding a piece of wood, when he fell. Martha was in the kitchen. She found him there. He was gone before the ambulance arrived. Martha was left alone with the secret. She continued the charade. She wore the old clothes. She lived in the cottage. She waited for Sarah to call just to say hello. But the calls became less frequent. They became transactional. Mom, can you watch the kids? I have a meeting. Mom, I need a loan. Just until payday. Mom, can I stay for the weekend? Our plumber is fixing the pipes. Asterisk. Martha gave what she could. She gave her time. She gave her food. She gave her love. She babysat the grandchildren while Sarah went to spa days. She cooked meals while Tom played golf. But she never gave the money. She kept hoping that Sarah would ask, Mom, are you okay? Do you have enough to eat? Are you lonely? Asterisk. She never did. The breaking point had come 6 months ago. Martha had fallen in the garden. She had been pruning roses, reaching for a high branch, when her foot slipped on the wet grass. She had broken her wrist. She lay on the grass for an hour before Mrs. Higgins, the neighbor, found her. Mrs. Higgins was walking her dog. She saw Martha on the ground and called the ambulance. She stayed with Martha in the hospital. She brought her clothes when she came home. She made her soup. Sarah didn't come for 3 days. When she finally arrived, she was annoyed. She walked into the cottage with a loud sigh. Mom, you scared me, Sarah said. She didn't hug her. She stood by the door. I was in a meeting. You know how important my job is. I couldn't just leave. I broke my wrist, Martha said. Her arm was in a cast. She was sitting on the sofa. Well, you're okay now, Sarah said. She looked around the messy house. There were papers on the table. Medicines on the shelf. You really need to hire someone to clean this place. It's a health hazard. Maybe we should look into that Florida place again. It would be easier. For everyone. Easier for who? Martha had asked. She looked at her daughter. For everyone, Sarah said. She picked up a magazine and straightened it. We can't be running over here every time you fall. It's disruptive. It affects our schedule. Tom has a big project coming up. That was the moment Martha decided. The Florida place wasn't for her safety. It was for Sarah's convenience. Martha was an inconvenience. A burden. A problem to be solved. A liability on their balance sheet. So, she began to plan. She contacted Mr. Davies, the lawyer. She reviewed the trust documents. She found the moral clause that John had insisted on including. The funds shall only be disbursed to those who demonstrate unwavering loyalty and care. Wealth is a tool for good, not a right of birth. Asterisk. She hired a private investigator to track Sarah's spending. She found out that Sarah was in debt. The luxury car was leased. The house was mortgaged to the hilt. They were living on credit, pretending to be wealthy while drowning in loans. They needed Martha's money to stay afloat. They were not successful. They were desperate. It wasn't love. It was survival. Martha realized that if she gave them the money, they would swallow her whole. They would take the $40 million, put her in the cheapest nursing home they could find, and spend the rest on vacations and cars. They would consume her life to fuel their ego. She would become a line item in their budget. She couldn't let that happen. Not to John's legacy. Not to her own dignity. So, she waited for her birthday. She waited for the moment when their greed would be most visible. She wanted them to see the treasure, reach for it, and have it snatched away. She wanted them to feel the loss. Because sometimes, pain is the only teacher that works. Sometimes, you have to lose everything to understand what matters. As she sat in the cottage after they left, drinking a cup of tea with Mrs. Higgins, Martha felt a sense of peace she hadn't known in years. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the floor. They're gone, Mrs. Higgins said. She was sitting in the armchair. She was a small woman, 60 years old, with kind eyes and work-worn hands. She had lived next door for 20 years. I heard them shouting. Are you okay, Martha? I'm better than okay, Martha said. She sipped her tea. It was warm. I'm free. What will you do with the money? Mrs. Higgins asked. Really? You're not really giving it all away, are you? I told you, Martha said. The hospice. The school. And you. Me. Mrs. Higgins laughed. She shook her head. I don't need money. I have my pension. I have my dog. You need a new roof, Martha said. I saw the leaks last winter. And you need to stop working double shifts at the factory. You're going to retire, Mary. You've earned it. You've taken care of me. Now let me take care of you." Mary's eyes filled with tears. She wiped them with her apron. "Martha, I can't. It's too much." "You can," Martha said. "You did what my daughter should have done. You cared. That is the currency that matters. Not dollars. Care." They sat in silence, watching the sun set over the fields. The cottage was small, and the paint was peeling, but inside, it was warm. Inside, it was full of love. And for Martha Galloway, that was the only wealth that counted. The weeks following the birthday incident were quiet. The silence from the city was deafening. Sarah did not call. Tom did not call. The grandchildren did not send a text. It was as if Martha had ceased to exist. In their minds, she had thrown away their future, so she was no longer their mother. She was an enemy. She was an obstacle. Martha didn't mind. She had Mrs. Higgins. She had the village. The news of the donation spread quickly. Martha didn't announce it, but money talks. When the local hospital received a check for $5 million, people asked questions. The administrator called Martha to thank her. When the school got new computers, the principal wrote a letter. And when Mrs. Higgins stopped coming to work and started gardening in her yard, people wondered. They saw her buying new clothes. They saw her fixing her car. It didn't take long for the truth to come out. Martha Galloway was not poor. She was a philanthropist. She was a secret millionaire. The village rallied around her. People brought her flowers. They offered to fix her roof. They offered to drive her to town. They treated her with respect, not because of the money, but because of what she did with it. She was no longer the lonely widow, she was the benefactor. But Martha kept her routine. She still wore her cardigans. She still grew her vegetables. She didn't want the fame. She just wanted the peace. She didn't want people to love her for the money. She wanted them to love her for the soup she shared. One afternoon, a car pulled into the driveway. It wasn't Sarah's SUV. It was a sedan. A young man got out. He looked nervous. He was wearing a cheap suit that didn't fit well. He walked up to the door and knocked. Martha opened it. "Can I help you, Mrs. Galloway?" the man asked. He took off his hat. "My name is David. I'm Sarah's brother." Martha froze. The air left her lungs. "Sarah doesn't have a brother. She's an only child." I'm adopted," the man said. He looked at the ground. "I was given up for adoption when I was a baby. I found out recently who my birth parents were. I found out about you. I didn't come for money. I wanted to meet you." Martha invited him in. Her hands were shaking. She made him tea. They sat in the living room. David told her his story. He had grown up in foster care. He had moved from home to home. He had struggled. He was working 2 jobs to put himself through college. He was studying engineering. He hadn't come for money. He had come to meet her. He wanted to know where he came from. "I saw the news," David said. He held his mug with both hands. "About the donation. I just wanted to say, thank you. You didn't have to do that. But you did. You helped people like me. People who have nothing." Martha looked at him. She saw John in his eyes. The same curve of the brow. The same intensity. She saw something in his eyes that she hadn't seen in Sarah's eyes for a long time. Gratitude. Humility. Curiosity. "Why didn't you ask for money?" Martha asked. She had to know. "Because I know what it's like to have nothing," David said. "I know that money doesn't fix everything. It doesn't fix loneliness. It doesn't fix family. I just wanted to know my mother. Even if you're not the one who raised me." Martha felt tears prick her eyes. She reached out and touched his hand. "I have a daughter. But I think I lost her." "Maybe not," David said. "People change. But you can't force it. You did the right thing. With the money. With the trust." They talked for hours. David told her about his life. About the foster homes. About the nights he went hungry. She told him about John. About the company. About the secret. About the cottage. She showed him the workshop. She showed him the blueprints. When he left, he didn't ask for a check. He asked if he could visit again. He asked if he could help fix the roof. "Yes," Martha said. "Please do." After he left, Martha sat in the chair and thought. She had given millions to strangers, but she had found a son in a stranger. It was ironic. It was painful, but it was also hopeful. She had lost Sarah, but she had found David. She called Mr. Davies. Add a clause to the trust, she said. For educational scholarships. For adopted children. For those who strive despite the odds. Name it the John Galloway Fund. Of course, Mr. Davies said. And Sarah, what about her share? Nothing for Sarah, Martha said. Unless she changes. Unless she proves herself. Not to me. To the world. She has to earn it. Understood. Martha hung up. She walked to the window. The sun was setting. The cottage was dark, but the lights in Mrs. Higgins' house were on. Warm. Yellow. Inviting. Martha realized that she was not alone. She had a community. She had a purpose. She had David. Sarah had the money she thought she deserved, but she had lost the mother. Martha had lost the daughter, but she had gained the world. It was a fair trade. 6 months later, Martha called a meeting. Not a birthday party. A will reading. She invited Sarah. She invited Tom. She invited the grandchildren. She also invited David, Mrs. Higgins, the hospital director, and the school principal. They met in the village hall, not the cottage. It was neutral ground. The hall was old, with wooden benches and a stage where the school plays were performed. It smelled of polish and dust. Sarah arrived late. She looked tired. The luxury car was gone. She was driving a sedan. It was old. Tom wasn't with her. The kids were with a babysitter. She looked smaller. The confidence was gone. The designer suit was replaced by a simple blouse. "Mom," Sarah said, sitting down. She didn't hug her. "Why are we here? You already gave the money away. There's nothing left. This is the final distribution," Martha said. She sat at the front. David sat next to her. The rest of the estate. The cottage. The personal effects. The remaining liquid assets. There's more. Sarah's eyes widened. Hope flickered in them. "You kept some." "Yes," Martha said. "For the right people." Mr. Davies stood up. He began to read the will. It was long and detailed. It outlined the scholarships. It outlined the hospice funding. It outlined the trust for David's education. It outlined the retirement fund for Mrs. Higgins. And then, it came to Sarah. "To my daughter, Sarah," Mr. Davies read. His voice was calm. "I leave this letter." He handed an envelope to Sarah. She opened it with shaking hands. The paper was heavy. The handwriting was her mother's. "Sarah, I leave you nothing of material value. I leave you the truth. You thought money was power. It is not. Power is connection. Power is love. You severed your connection. You lost your power. Asterisk. However, the trust remains open. If you can demonstrate 1 year of voluntary service to the community, without pay, without recognition, the trust will release a stipend for your children's education. Not for you. For them. Asterisk. It is not too late to change. But you must do it for the right reasons. Not for the money. For the people. Asterisk. Love, Mom. Asterisk. Sarah read the letter twice. She looked at Martha. 1 year. Voluntary service. Yes, Martha said. At the hospice. At the shelter. Wherever you are needed. No cameras. No social media posts. Just work. You have to serve. You have to learn. Sarah looked down at the letter. She looked at her hands. Manicured, soft hands that had never done a day of hard labor. She looked at David. He was smiling slightly. He looked at peace. I don't know if I can," she whispered. Her voice was small. "I don't know how." "Then you won't get the money," Martha said. "And that is your choice. You can walk away. Or you can stay." Sarah stood up. She didn't yell. She didn't scream. She just nodded. She folded the letter and put it in her pocket. "I'll think about it." She walked out. Martha watched her go. She didn't know if Sarah would come back. She didn't know if she would ever see her daughter again. But she had done what she had to do. She had set the boundary. She had protected the legacy. David stood up and walked over to Martha. He put a hand on her shoulder. "You did the right thing." "I hope so," Martha said. "I hope she comes back." "You did," he said. "You taught her that love isn't transactional. That's the hardest lesson of all. But you gave her a chance. That's what matters." Martha smiled. She looked around the room. At the people she had helped. At the son she had found. at the life she had built. The cottage was still peeling. The car was still rusted. But Martha Galloway was rich. Richer than she had ever been when the money was hidden in the bank. Because now, her wealth was visible. It was in the smiles of the people around her. It was in the safety of the veterans. It was in the education of the children. It was in the roof over Mrs. Higgins' head. She stood up. "Thank you all for coming. There is tea and cake in the next room. Please, help yourselves." They moved to the next room, laughing, talking, living. Martha stayed behind for a moment. She looked at the empty chair where Sarah had sat. "Come home, Sarah," she whispered. "Not for the money. For me." She turned off the light and joined the party. The sun was shining through the windows of the village hall. It was a new day. And for Martha Galloway, it was the best day of her life. The months following the will reading were a test of endurance for everyone involved. For Martha, it was a time of quiet reflection. She spent her days in the cottage, often with David visiting on weekends. He helped her fix the roof, just as he had promised. They worked together, hammering nails, sealing tiles. It was hard work, but Martha found joy in it. It reminded her of John. It reminded her of the days when work was honest and rewards were earned. David became a constant presence in her life. He studied hard, funded by the trust, but he worked part-time to pay for his own expenses. He didn't want special treatment. He wanted to earn his keep. Martha watched him with pride. He was everything Sarah could have been. For Sarah, the winter was long and cold. She lost the luxury car when the lease ran out and she couldn't afford the payments. Tom filed for separation, unable to deal with the financial stress and the shame of the public revelation. The friends who had surrounded her when she was wealthy disappeared when the money dried up. She was alone. She read the letter every day. 1 year of voluntary service. It seemed impossible. She didn't know how to serve. She only knew how to take. But the thought of her children losing their education funding gnawed at her. She loved her children, even if she had failed her mother. One day, she drove to the village. She didn't go to the cottage. She went to the hospice. She walked into the office and asked to volunteer. She didn't mention her name. She didn't mention her mother. She just said she wanted to help. They put her to work cleaning rooms, changing beds, holding hands with dying patients. It was hard. It was dirty. It was emotional. She cried often. She wanted to quit. But she stayed. She stayed because she had nowhere else to go. She stayed because she wanted to prove something to herself. Months passed. She didn't tell Martha. She wanted to do it for the right reasons. She wanted to earn it. Spring came. The snow melted. The flowers bloomed. Martha sat in her garden. She was weaker now. The winter had taken a toll on her health. But she was happy. One afternoon, a car pulled into the driveway. It was Sarah. She got out. She looked different. Her clothes were simple. Her face was bare of makeup. She looked tired, but real. "Mom," she said. She walked up the path. She didn't rush. "Sarah," Martha said. She stood up. "I've been working," Sarah said. "At the hospice. For 6 months. I didn't tell you. I wanted to do it for me. Not for the money." Martha looked at her. She saw the change. The hardness was gone. The greed was gone. There was humility in her eyes. "I know," Martha said. "Mrs. Higgins told me. She volunteers there too." Sarah smiled. It was a small smile. "I miss you, Mom." "I miss you too," Martha said. They didn't hug immediately. The wound was still there. But it was healing. "I don't want the money," Sarah said. "Not for me. For the kids. But I want you to know. I'm sorry. I was wrong." "I know," Martha said. "That's all I wanted to hear." They sat on the porch. They drank tea. They talked. Not about money. Not about the house. About life. About loss. About hope. It wasn't a perfect ending. The trust was still there. The conditions still stood. But the relationship was rebuilding. Brick by brick. Martha looked at her daughter. She knew that the money didn't matter anymore. The love mattered. And love, like the cottage, needed maintenance. It needed work. But it was worth it. The sun set over the fields. The cottage stood strong. The secret was out. But the real secret was this: wealth is not what you have. It is who you are. And Martha Galloway was rich indeed. Years later, the cottage was no longer a private home. It was a community center. The rooms where Sarah had played as a child were now classrooms for the village children. The garden where Martha had fallen was now a memorial park for the veterans. Martha passed away peacefully in her sleep at the age of 85. David was by her side. Sarah was there too. They held her hands. She left this world knowing she had done the right thing. The trust continued. The scholarships funded hundreds of students. The hospice cared for thousands of patients. Mrs. Higgins lived out her days in comfort, always telling the story of the woman who gave everything away. Sarah took over the management of the trust. She didn't take a salary. She worked hard. She taught her children the value of service. She told them the story of the cottage. She told them about the box. She told them about the choice. Money is a tool, she would say. Use it to build, not to buy. And in the village, people still talked about Martha Galloway. They didn't talk about her millions. They talked about her kindness. They talked about her courage. They talked about the day she tore up the document and chose love over gold. The cottage stood at the end of the winding lane. The paint was fresh now. The roof was fixed. The car in the driveway was gone, replaced by a bicycle rack. It was no longer a fortress of secrets. It was a home of truth. And that was the greatest legacy of all.